Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Well, tonight I'm going to ask you all to have patience with me. The drosha tonight is about Pinchas. And basically, the drosha covers three different, very, very important stories. The one is about Pinchas, who was a zealot. And I'm going to explain that about him just coming. I'm going to be talking about him tonight. This is a part that most rabbis or most people prefer not to discuss. The second part is a wonderful part, and the third, which we'll be discussing tomorrow, where we have more time and we actually read the Torah. The second part is about the daughters of Zelophehad. In that time, the tradition was that only a man could inherit. And we'll see how the Bible deals with this. And the third part was about Moses' leadership. Why was Joshua chosen to follow? But the most difficult part to discuss, and as I said, most people avoid it, I couldn't give myself the permission, was to tell you about Pinchas, who was a zealot. This perhaps is that there were only two people considered zealots in the Bible, and the one was Pinchas, who murdered two people, or he didn't murder. We're going to discuss that. And the other one was Elijah. Elijah, Baruch Hashem, didn't have to murder anyone. He actually disobeyed the order and didn't do a sacrifice in the grounds of this holy ark and temple. He actually did it outside. But we'll discuss Pinchas. So let me tell you a little bit about Pinchas, and I'm going to ask you to think about this with me, because it impacts on today and what we see around us. Recalling the Pinchas story, the Israelites, having been saved by God from Balaam's curses, you'll remember that the last Torah portion was about Balaam, the talking donkey, and Balaam wanted to curse and destroy the Jews. In fact, he couldn't, because when he opened his mouth, words came out to bless the Jews and the Israelites instead. So, the Israelites, having been saved by God from Balaam's curses, fell headlong into the trap that Balaam then set for them now in the next parasha. They begin consorting with Midianite women and were soon worshipping their gods. Balaam got them to mingle after the good words were in his mouth and got the Midianite woman to entice them. And so they were soon worshipping their gods. So after all this miracle again of saving, the Jews followed Balaam, some of the men, and started cavorting, let's put it that way, with the woman. God's anger burned. He ordered the death of the people's leaders, and a plague raged and 24,000 died. Now, you and I have to translate this in today's era. There is no point to reading the Torah or being religious if you don't understand the lesson today. We don't understand quite why and how consorting with the Midianites, probably eating different food, worshipping different gods, led to a disease. And so they say that a plague raged amongst them from Hashem. Many people believe Hashem has sent this coronavirus and this Delta variant among us. Not true. We've done it ourselves. And you've heard me say it. This is only my opinion. Of course, you don't have to agree. And many very ultra-Orthodox rabbis wouldn't. But we deserve what we've got. Every man's death diminishes me. The fact that we shut up and we didn't make our voices heard loud enough against wildlife poaching led to some man in China eating it. The rest is history. So I want you to think in those years, all these thousands of years ago, as I read, God's anger burned. He ordered the death of the people's leaders. A plague raged, 24,000 people died. Translate that into the understanding we have today. Because after the second temple fell and there were no more prophets, God asked us to use our minds to understand these stories and translate it into our actions following his laws. A leading Israelite, Zimri, brought a Midianite woman, Gozbi, and cohabitated with her right in full view of Moses, the people, and in front of the tabernacle. Can you believe that? It was the most brazen act. It symbolized the okay for all the men of Israel who were also cavorting and consorting with women and sleeping with them and following other gods. It gave them the okay. Pinchas took a spear and drove it through them both, and they both died, and the plague stopped. Now, here's the question. And of course, you must understand that there has been very vociferous debate. And of course, your modern Orthodox or your progressive rabbis would not interpret this as the ultra-Orthodox would say, good job, it was an act of God, please they did. So you've got to go between the extremes. But the big question here is, was Pinchas a hero or a murderer? And I'd like to just spend a few more minutes discussing this with you and asking you to think about this, because it impacts exactly on what is happening today. On the one hand, he saved countless lives. No more people died. There was no plague because the plague stopped. On the other hand, to an onlooker, he might have just been simply a man of violence caught up in the moment. The parasha of Balak ends with this terrible ambiguity unresolved. Only in our parasha do we see an answer, and perhaps Hashem tries to answer it, and there is no clear answer to this. Pinchas, and this is what Hashem says, son of Eleazar and Aaron the priest, you have turned back my anger from the Israelites by being zealous amongst them on my behalf. So God is saying you've done a good thing. So I didn't wipe out the Israel people in my zeal, says God. Now I want to compare this, and forgive it if some of you find this outrageous. You will remember with Hitler, right? There was one person in Hitler's cabinet, one of his closest SS men, who tried to organize his death because he knew it would save countless and millions of Jews. He failed. That is the type of person, and that's what I'm asking you to think of with me. That person, he was a Pinchas. He wanted to kill Hitler. He understood that Hitler was evil. Now, perhaps, if you're faced with evil, and there was no one else in that whole SS army but one man who thought, I'm going to do it. Maybe the others were scared. They probably agreed with him. But he was killed. He was murdered by Hitler as a result. And he failed in his heroic effort. In Judaism, he would have been a hero. So, what are we going to make of this whole thing? We are facing a very similar dilemma today, in many ways more than one. For example, rabbinic thought, and here I refer to the great late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was an incredible free thinker, and in his early career was severely castigated for what he wrote as a modern Orthodox religious leader by the ultra-Orthodox. I found that only out recently. But he wrote, when is it right? Because it says in Halakha, you cannot murder. In fact, even in the Noahide laws, which Hashem gave to the world before he chose the Jewish nation not to be better or superior, but merely to enact his laws to help others by following our example. Even in the Noahide laws, to kill, to murder, was the worst sin, and it says already years before Abraham or our covenant that if you murder, you will be killed in return. And that the three sins that are the greatest are idolatry, to kill someone, and also to sleep with a woman who is not your wife. That is the three greatest sins, long before our 10 commandments. Now, halachic law, all those laws were an expansion on the 10 commandments and how great rabbinical minds and sages saw them. So, what are we to think? The dilemma faces nations today, not only individuals, but the dilemma today is the dilemma of countries. And we have the same dilemma of people criticizing nearly every government in the world, governments who've chosen a lockdown to save lives, although other lives will now be lost through poverty and starving. Or should they not have a lockdown, let the disease spread, and then save a few lives afterwards? Well, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs argued that the highest law of all, especially in this era, where prophets don't exist, where we have to try and understand the Torah, there is no higher value than saving a life, even if it means others will die as collateral damage. To save a life now may save thousands of lives in the future. That can be condoned. What is your thoughts on all of this? It's very, very difficult. So governments are criticized when they lock down because people are going to die through lack of food. Although, thank God, there are people like Anshul Marion and others and all the religions who try and help those people starving through no jobs. But at the same time, if we don't lock down, which side would our Torah and Judaism be on? Well, I like to think, and I agree with Rabbi Sachs and also many other progressive thinkers, that we've got to be on the side of saving lives the best we can, even though there is what they call in a war collateral damage. And now perhaps I'd just like to conclude by trying to bring this analogy as well to wars, to conflicts, to Israel, to Palestine, to Syria, to ISIS. Can we call the death of one Muslim by another as saving lives? I don't think so. There's no lives to be saved there. There it is sheer power that you are going to be forced to only act and think in one way. Judaism would be completely against that type of zealotry, if that's what you want to call it. I don't know. What do you think? In a war, when the world ultimately decided to go against Hitler, 6 million lives had been lost of Jews. 3 million lives of Poles had been lost. Another several million of heterosexual and gays and gypsies. And then another 20 million lives were lost in a war. But you and I are here today. And perhaps if those 26 million lives, Baruch Hashem, they could have been saved, if that one brave man in Hitler's SS, right next to him, had have succeeded with his plot, 26 million people would not have died. What is the answer? Today, Israel has to defend herself and other countries against what is called collateral damage. Because the truth is, if indeed you act against evil, There is going to be collateral damage today in a war, no matter where it is. Israel and the IDF, I personally believe them, do the very most they can not to cause collateral damage. An organization doing the most they can to kill innocent collateral damage on the other side cannot be good. So these are the questions I want to leave you with. What was Pinchas, a hero or a murderer? Maybe it depends on which side you're standing. But in Judaism, in our Torah, God does one thing. He says, thank you, because you saved me killing thousands of people. Just as way we would have thanked that incredible SS man who attempted to kill Hitler long before millions of lives were lost. On the other hand, there's just one thing I'd like to share with you here that I kept. So maybe it depends on the motives, but we face the same dilemmas today in war. We face the same dilemmas a country faces in this pandemic. However, the ultimate thing is, with a nation, they've got to consider the long-time consequences of their actions. And ultimately, some rabbis have decided that there was a zealot like Pinchas, and although God rewarded his act by calling him a prophet, he also then insisted that he renew the covenant. Now, that wasn't the covenant that Hashem gave us at Mount Sinai, but he put on Pinchas after that one act, a covenant where he could never do that act again, where he had to only look and work for peace. And another thing, had Pinchas killed them before the sexual act in front of the people or after the sexual act, he would have never been called a Jewish hero. It was only because he killed them in the actual act. So just compare that with what is happening today. If you shoot someone who's just about to throw a bomb which would kill 10, 20, 30, 40 people standing there, we might say that's a Pinchas act. But if you do as other zealots do in the fall of the Second Temple, where they said they were being zealots for the sake of God, and they killed people and they argued, but they didn't kill the Romans. The zealots in the fall of the Second Temple, and it says it clearly here, fought amongst themselves and killed other Jews who didn't think like them. And this is why the Second Temple fell. On this vexating and rather difficult understanding, I leave you to think that there is no 100% right and wrong in life, that one has to look at all the facts, and then one has to sum up, look at the consequences, and above all, look at the motivation of the people hurting others. Is it for their own good? Is it to glorify themselves as a ruler, as we've seen in our country prior to this government, and grab everything for themselves, and it's not for the sake of the people? They're the zealots who were punished by the Second Temple falling. Or is it someone like that wonderful SS man or Pinchas, who did an act that is against the commandment of thou shalt not murder, but to save thousands and thousands and thousands of other lives? Shabbat Shalom.